Does it say recording for you?
It does.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, today we have a special guest on the show, Dr. Gabrielle Fundaro. She's a Renaissance periodization consultant, a certified sports nutritionist, and a certified health coach. Did I miss anything in there?
No, I think that's it. As long as you don't say like expert or something or guru.
Well, I think you're going to have to play that role today, but it's a pleasure to have you on the podcast today, Doctor. How is everything?
It's good. It's good. It's a little bit chilly out here in Arizona. It's like 60 degrees, and I'm really spoiled on having spent, many months at 110, which is my preferable temperature.
110 is your preferable? Oh,
Yeah.
man.
Maybe that's a little bit warm, but like I would say like 100 feels good up to like 105. And I walk outside and I'm like, this is great. It's toasty. It's like refreshing in a way. So yeah, I'm like really, I didn't expect that we were going to see like 60-degree weather this week. So I'm like really super bundled up.
Yeah, I feel that because I'm in North Carolina, right? And the good thing about North Carolina is that it's always kind of moderate. So it's not going to get too hot, maybe for like 1 week, and it's never
Mm-hmm.
going to get too cold. But
Mm-hmm.
this week, the change of temperature, I'm sorry, guys, I got a cold today. Like my voice a
Oh,
little bit crazy. My voice might go, so who knows? But um, but yeah, first of all, what is a Renaissance periodization consultant? Like I've never heard of that, but it sounds super cool.
yeah, it really does. So Renaissance Periodization is a company that works internationally with folks who are anything from recreational exercisers wanting to lose, 5 or 10 pounds or increase their performance or get healthier, all the way up to world-class strength athletes. We provide a range of ebooks and nutrition and training templates that are auto-regulated and auto-adjust to folks' needs and recovery. We have an app that is sort of like a version of a coach in your pocket, although it's more of a prescriptive coach that tells you what to do, but doesn't necessarily help you figure out how you're going to do it. And that's where the RP coaches or consultants come in. We use the term consultant more sparingly now and really use the word coach because I think consulting is more of a information delivery service, whereas a coach forms an alliance with their client and helps them to decide what they want to do based on their values and goals, and then helps them come up with ways to do it in a client-centered manner. So that's what I do via RP. I work with those clients 100% via email, and then via Vitamin PhD Nutrition Telehealth, I am able to engage with my clients in the same way that we're engaging now with video calls, using the skills and spirit of motivational interviewing and cognitive behavioral coaching within the framework of comprehensive coaching, which is something that I developed with Shannon Beer to sort of operationalize how we might put all of these best practices together in a way that makes sense and helps our clients achieve more than just the physical and aesthetic changes.
So actually that's cool. You said cognitive behavioral
Mhm.
coaching. How does that tie in with the health aspect in your opinion?
Yeah. So we borrow from CBT. So cognitive behavioral therapy is a protected therapy, but CBC is something that would be within the scope of practice for coaches to perform with their clients. We also borrow from some of the philosophies and practices of acceptance and commitment therapy. So motivational interviewing it serves as sort of our foundation. So motivational interviewing is a way of being with a person that gives them a safe, non-judgmental space with which they can communicate and collaborate with you as their coach. We take the stance that a coach shouldn't necessarily be someone that's just telling someone what to do, but instead we can act as sort of travel guides. So we help people figure out where exactly they want to be, which usually is something a little bit deeper than just having a six pack. Like there's a reason behind why they want to have the six pack, right? Like that makes them feel confident or makes them feel like they're going to be more accepted so that they can find a partner, so that they can have kids because family is important to them. So we help people figure out the deeper reasons behind why they might want to make a change. And that can actually help to strengthen their motivation and commitment to making a change. So motivational interviewing, that spirit of collaboration and acceptance and empathy and evocation, where we are drawing out their innate desire and capacity for change, underlines everything else that we're going to do. Once the person has decided that they want to make the change and they know what change they want to make, then we can plan how we might want to go about making that change. But of course, even the best laid plans, we're going to have obstacles and unforeseen roadblocks, just like we would if we're an actual travel guide. And then we might need to take a detour, or we might need to help the client to either enhance their sort of psychological flexibility, so their ability to still take deliberate action, even when things are really difficult, or to potentially challenge and modify unhelpful thought and behavior patterns. So the former is ACT. It's about accepting, hey, this is the way that things are right now. What's the next reasonable step that I can take? And CBC, which is, identifying things like cognitive distortions, like black and white thinking, and then, coming up with ways to sort of reframe those so that we can create something that's more helpful in terms of bringing us closer to either our values or our goals. Sometimes we live within alignment, with our values, but we might have to put goals on hold because we're in the middle of a pandemic. We can't get to a gym, so maybe like our squat PR is going to be put on hold, but can we still like live in accordance with our values and say like, what are the other things that I can do that are supportive of my health as a value?
Yeah, I really admire that, because nowadays mental health is so stressed upon, and it makes sense because you look at all of these any sport, right? Any sport, and the best of the best are always the ones that had some kind of a coach that was very close to them, right?
Mm-hmm.
That listened to everything that they said, considered them, and they know them inside out. Rather than now, you have some gyms with a like, for example, in boxing, right? Because that's the sport that I play.
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of all I know. So you see the guys that, like Mike Tyson, have Cus D'Amato, the famous trainer that came up with him, that picked him off the street, understood him mentally. And
Mm-hmm.
he even said like he summoned him, right? That's what Mike Tyson said, because he understood him so well. He was just literally in his brain. But now when things are more commercial, you have a coach and like 500 students, it's like it's just coach telling me what to do,
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I really admire that. That's so important, and I'm happy that you emphasize on that.
Oh, thank you. And I love I love that idea of being summoned, that we have this innate capacity for change, and it's about summoning that. It's about evoking that in a person. Like when I'm mentoring coaches and they're like, how do I get my client to X, Y, and Z? I'm like, you don't get anyone to do anything. You help that person decide what it is they want to do. And then you draw out of them, their solutions and their ideas. And together you take, an idea might be like a lump of clay, like, okay, this is cool, this is workable. Like, how can we make it really realistic? How can we make it specific? How do you know when you're done? Like, how do you know when you've gotten to the place you want to be? Like, are we headed for a bowl or a vase? And like, what's it going to look like? That, that's the collaborative aspect. So summoning, I love that idea.
Yeah, and making sure that your clients enjoy what they're doing. Otherwise, you can't stick to something long term if you don't enjoy it. That goes with
Yeah.
diet, working out. Like, keep it fun a little bit, and then you're gonna look forward to it, right? Because if you dread something, like, not gonna
Oh,
happen.
yeah. Yeah, that's the thing. We have this like sort of like masochistic, culture, like this subculture within the industry of like, oh, just dry chicken breasts and brown rice all day, and like it's the grind, and like I'm going to war and stuff. And I'm like, realistically, some people like really get off on that. They have like sort of that intrinsic motivation, like they enjoy it because it's like, oh, this is like I'm enjoying this in an ironic way. But a lot of people don't enjoy that. And we can't assume that other people will enjoy the same things that we enjoy. We have to be able to meet them where they are and help them find the things that are enjoyable to them.
So, what kind of athletes do you work with primarily?
Oh man, I would say like most of my clients now are more Gen Pop. But if I had to pick the two sports that I see represented most often, it would be, or the two like forms of activity, definitely CrossFit. So there's like a really big following in CrossFit, a really big RP kind of following in CrossFit, a lot of support, and then powerlifting and weightlifting. So it's really cool to work with strength athletes because that was sort of like the I guess the sport that I was most involved in a few years ago was powerlifting. And then I work with a few folks that are runners, and I've helped a couple people with physique competitions. But I'd say the vast majority of clients now are trying to find, that balance between and their identity as a recreational athlete, and like how they can, how to um, embody like that approach to nutrition, like having a performance mindset, but also something that's sustainable and something that fits within, their lifestyles, because they're not like paid athletes, they're concerned about performance. And I think we've had this sort of dichotomous view of like eating for performance or eating for health, and like you can't be flexible if you're an athlete. Everything has to be super regimented, and you can't trust your body. You've got to go by the numbers. And that application is not a great fit for most people. So I'm just kind of like helping people, navigate that space and find their own best approach.
Yeah, so through weightlifting and powerlifting, what I've found is that because I do that too a lot, but I see that it kind of interferes with like mobility, sports, and everything. How do you keep a balance between that for your clients? Like as you said, between health and performance, or even aesthetic.
Mm.
How do you keep that balance?
Mm. Well, I think balance is subjective. Like it has to be determined, like the client has to determine what their balance is. So in the first session that I have with a person, when they come to me and they're like, I feel stuck right now because I don't want to be tracking all of my macros all the time. Like I want to be able to go out with my family, or I want to be able to eat this cookie, that my kid is giving me. But I also want to perform in the gym, and I also want to, maybe like change my physique or something. Then I just ask them, if you were to wake up tomorrow and you had your ideal lifestyle, like your ideal day, what would it look like? And then we walk through like wake up, breakfast, what do you do during the day? What does your workout look like? What's your approach to food? How are you feeling throughout the day? Where do you spend time? And from there, we can start to look at, the disparities between that versus the reality, and then coming up with the next reasonable steps to bring them closer to that place. And it's not going to be a complete overhaul, of their lives. It's, is it can, oh, okay, you want to eat more vegetables. What's a reasonable addition to you? And they're like, oh, dinner. Okay, vegetables at dinner. So that's where we start. And I find that in most cases, people build so much momentum in that direction once they give themselves the space to kind of try and push a little bit out of their comfort zone. Like maybe a person doesn't really want to track macros, but they're a little bit nervous to stop. Or on the other hand, a person wants to learn how to do macros, but like they've never done it before. So we have to take these incremental steps. And then as they succeed at those steps, they build more self-efficacy, more situational self-confidence, and more. One of my clients called these, she said she kept going through capacity doors. So she'd like reach a capacity and then be like, oh, I can go to the next step now. So it's client centered in that, they're determining the direction they want to go and the pace. And I'm helping them to overcome obstacles. And then in some cases, empowering them with information. So I'm helping to provide the tools to expedite their journey. Not to say that they wouldn't be able to get there on their own. It's just like having a coach. Yeah, it's having a travel guide. Like, so you don't, kind of get lost. You've got like good maps and good tools. So yeah, and then, the balance is decided by them. Like when they get to that place where they're like, oh, this feels right. Like I'm spending what I feel is the right amount of mental time or mental energy and time and whatnot on food versus family versus exercise. And then it's just maintaining that.
Yeah, definitely. That's a great way to look at it. And I know what I was interested in is that, you know so much about the body, right? Because this is what you do, and especially the gut. And that's actually what I wanted to talk to you today
Mm-hmm.
about. And so when you work with these clients, how like in depth do you get? Like, oh, looking forward or looking to, optimize their gut health, their stress levels, like all of this kind of stuff. How closely do you work with that?
Well, again, I mean, that's kind of client specific. I think that I've started to branch out a little bit more. And it was sort of, like how I mentioned consulting earlier. When I started with telehealth, it was really more about consulting. It was to provide people with information so that they could make informed decisions about their digestive health. So it was more about information provision. And I still do that to a great extent. But now I do it in with a different delivery. And I probably give like less unsolicited advice, like on the internet and stuff. When I'm seeing people like, I did this and this for my gut, I'm kind of like, oh, that's not evidence-based. Like, that's not real. So, I mean, if it's a practitioner, sometimes I will say something, but when it comes to just people like feeling better, I'm like, okay, that's great. You know, people don't really like unsolicited advice or information for the most part. And even if they come to my site, you know, my Instagram, and they have some strong beliefs, even though they've come upon it themselves, like they still sometimes won't be ready for the information. Like they won't be receptive to it. So when I'm working with a client who has, you know, some GI concerns, now I would say in most cases, people, I'm self-selected, you know, like they come to me because they know who I am and how I work. So I have to do a little bit less of the upfront, like, hey, they're going to be dispelling of myths and things like that. But when I am going to give a person information, I just like ask first, oh, okay, I see that you've done like a GI map test or something. Can I give you some information about how those work and what the limitations are? And if they say yes, then I'm like, blah, 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 blah. Okay, here it is. Now, what do you think about it? So I would say that the umbrella for what I do is providing people with information to clarify misconceptions and potential confusion because of the poor information that they might be getting on Instagram from people that I'm sure mean well, but don't have a solid understanding of the literature. So I don't ever claim to treat, cure, or prevent disease. I couch everything 100% as education because that's what it is. I mean, if I give a person information about like FODMAPs or a GI map test or whatever else, and they still say like, oh, I want to go do one of these tests anyway. Okay, at least you made an informed choice. You know, you decided that you wanted to do that. But by and large, when people are coming to me with questions about like, should I do this and that and the other tests, and I can let them know like, these are not valid tests. They're not going to give you useful information. But these other tests are used in a clinical setting. And of course, I always start with like, have you visited a gastroenterologist or an endocrinologist or whatever to rule out X, Y, and Z? And then once they come and they have a clean bill of health, then I say, okay, let's look at some potential dietary interventions that might be recommended. Or, you know, have you heard about a low FODMAP diet? Here's how it actually goes down, you know, to make sure that they're empowered, because I think there are few things that are more frustrating to me than someone being misguided and confused and then like losing all faith in science because someone else didn't actually do science, but they called it that.
Yeah, definitely. So just quick clarification. What is a GI map test?
GI map test is a stool microbiome analysis. They call it a comprehensive stool analysis. I don't know why they use that term because we are not capable of actually identifying all the microbes that are present. It's not fully representative of the gastrointestinal microbiota. Stool samples are actually significantly different. And depending on how they do the test, we either don't we don't identify entire types of microbes, like we're going to be only looking at bacteria, or we're not going to be able to determine who's alive or who's dead or what they're actually doing. And so these tests are sold as sort of diagnostic tests. And a lot of practitioners will have their clients pay to have this done. And then they'll say, oh, you have, you know, your levels of this microbe are too low, or, you know, this immune marker, but they're not valid tests. And in fact, the lab that the company that develops that, they come up with their own reference ranges also, which have not been, you know, like validated by an outside source. And then when you're outside the normal reference range, you buy supplements from them to correct, you know, the dysbiosis. So they are literally, and I don't know that I coined this phrase, but I said it the first time last year, and I see a lot of people using it, which is awesome. but they're trying to sell you a problem so you'll buy their solution.
Yeah, there you go. It's a business, right? At the end of the day, everything's a business.
Yeah, yeah.
So what exactly this is super interesting to me because I know nothing about the gut microbiome, right? And I think I'm speaking for a lot of people here too, right? Because the gut microbiome is just something that's not talked about, right? We look at issues from an outside view, like, okay,
Mm-hmm.
oh, you feel bad, you feel slow, then eat this. You look bad, eat that. Your skin's
Mm-hmm.
like this, do this, right?
Yeah.
But what goes on inside is so much more important, it seems like, and so much more accurate of a diagnosis almost as to what's going on. So
Mm-hmm.
where does the gut microbiome start and where does it end? And like, why is it so important to keep this healthy?
Oh, that's an interesting way of phrasing it. Where does it start and where does it end? So the gastric microbiota starts in your stomach and ends at your butthole. But no, in more scientific terms. So humans are colonized inside and out by these micro ecosystems of microbial organisms. We have skin microbiota, we have oral microbiota, we have the gastrointestinal, and women have a vaginal microbiome. So the microbiome, that term actually refers to the organisms and their genetic material, whereas the microbiota are just the organisms themselves. So technically speaking, you are likely sterile in utero, so you don't have anything, in your GI tract. Although that is sort of a contentious topic, we're not quite sure that that is really the case. But you are first colonized at birth, so you'll either be colonized by microbiota of your, like, because you come out near the rectum, so fecal microbiota there, or if it's a C-section, you'd be initially colonized by microbiota that are on the skin and in the environment. So colonization might be delayed if you're born via C-section. And in the first couple of years of life, it's a very sort of like dynamic system. You have changes occurring to the anatomy of your GI tract. So it starts off quite aerobic, so there are higher oxygen levels, and it becomes more anaerobic over time, less permeable, less oxygen. That causes changes in the microbial community. There are specific carbohydrates found in breast milk that have not yet been replicated in a lab. So if you're breast versus bottle fed, you might also see some differences there. And then you see a big bloom in the abundance and diversity of microbes when you start eating solid foods. So those are some of the biggest factors early in life that may potentially predispose you to having something like asthma or skin conditions later on. That's sort of the theory at the moment. Throughout life, the microorganisms are pretty stable. So about 60 to 80% of the microbes in your gut are going to be the same kind of no matter what. And you have a human specific group of microbes that we can look at that and say, this is a human signature. And then you also have about 2/3 of your microbes that are you specific. So you're going to look very different from the person next to you. You'll be similar to your family members and people, like, or if you have a twin or something, than you will be to your neighbor. But you and your neighbor will be more similar to someone from another country. So the microbes themselves, as I mentioned, we start in the stomach. So you have like a very low abundance and low diversity of microbes in the stomach. And the number and the diversity of microbes increase as we get to the large intestine and the colon. They are primarily bacteria, but we also have some archaea, which are similar to bacteria, but they're different. And we have some fungi like yeasts. And we also have bacteriophages, which are viruses that can infect bacterial cells, just like viruses can, infect human cells. And together they fend off pathogens. They help to produce small amounts of vitamins for us. They ferment carbohydrates to either gases or short chain fatty acids. And we call that energy harvesting, when they take something that's indigestible to humans and then they turn it into a short chain fatty acid that we can actually absorb. It actually increases the amount of energy that we can absorb from our diet. And they probably also play a role in most other human organ systems. They can produce some neurotransmitters and precursors to neurotransmitters. They interact with our immune cells. They can produce toxins that initiate an immune response. So they do interact with the periphery, so all of the tissues outside of the gastrointestinal tract. But the problem is that because it's a whole ecosystem in there, and we even have microhabitats when we're looking at like the small intestine versus the large intestine, or the lumen versus the mucus, that it's so complex that we haven't been able to derive any causative relationships. So the gut the gut microbiome doesn't cause disease or cause health. We haven't been able to identify that yet.
Really? That last part, that's crazy, because I've heard, you watch like 2 health related videos on YouTube and you get all these ads about like the gut, right? So it's like I hear like, oh, this is the cause of all of these disease, like they even said autism and all of these kind of things, and it could be a link, but I didn't know like it has not been proven.
No causative link between the gut microbiome and any disease. I mean, it's staggering, and it's a little frustrating because there certainly could be, but we have to wait, because what happens when we say this causes this, and then a couple years later we realize that's not the case. The same thing with like eggs or red meat, then people are like, you can't trust science. And it's like, no, you can't trust like, the first Netflix documentary or YouTube video that you watch, but that's not science. Science is an emergent process, and it is kind of slow, but it follows a logical progression that something has to be like physiologically plausible first, has to be, okay, this could potentially happen in the human body. And then we can look at cell culture to see, are there, in cells, what are the biochemical pathways that might be present that could cause this to happen? And then we go to like animal models. And that's when we can start to do things like the fecal microbiome transplant, where we take fecal samples and put it into a germ-free mouse and then see how that mouse behaves or how its physiology changes. And then we have to usually go to better animal models. And then we look in humans and we say like, oh, fecal transplant seems to help mice a lot. Does it work in humans? If we take, fecal samples from a person who's lean and give that to a person with obesity, will that reduce that person's body weight? Nope. And then you say like, okay, well, we've done this a couple times and it's not working. Back to the drawing board. Clearly this is not a direct causal link. So but people want solutions right now, and they want to have something that they can like have an intervention for, as if gut health is one thing, or the gut microbiome is just one thing and not tens of trillions of microorganisms interacting with each other and your cells.
Yeah. And if I'm not mistaken, all this research, or the gut became popular, like very popular, not too long ago, right? In terms of like how the body has been studied. So that it is very quick to jump to crazy conclusions, especially if it's pretty recent. So what foods do you recommend for somebody to maintain a healthy gut?
I wish we knew that. It's funny because it's like they have, now these like personalized nutrition tests that are offshoots of that stool analysis that I had mentioned earlier, that now there are these direct to consumer companies that say, send us your stool samples and we'll tell you what you should or shouldn't eat. And the genes that they might find in that stool sample are not really indicative of what a person should or shouldn't eat. They're indicative of what the person has been eating because the microbiota express genes just like we do that are needed in response to whatever challenge or whatever adaptation is required or whatever needs to be metabolized. But the genes present are not the genes that are actually being used. So you can think of your genetic material like a recipe book. That doesn't necessarily mean that all of those recipes are going to be made. So that's another, that I think that can make things confusing when people see companies selling these things, that they would, of course, logically assume that it means that they work, that they're going to give useful, get useful information. But we are not yet able to determine what a person might need to eat to support a diverse microbiome. That being said, when we look at the needs of microbes. And when we look at intervention studies in humans, and we look at observational data, just like comparing the diets of two different groups and seeing how their profiles differ, we find that people who eat a wide variety of plant foods, so fruits, vegetables, whole grains, legumes, that they tend to have higher microbial diversity than people who do not eat a diversity of plant foods. That dietary fiber seems to play a significant role. That moderate alcohol consumption is also associated with greater microbial diversity, as is regular physical activity. So it's like not super fun and sexy, but if someone wanted like a very basic, give me one thing to go read about, I'd say probably would be a Mediterranean style dietary pattern along with physical activity would probably set you up best. And it doesn't necessarily have to be, people are like, oh, vegan, vegetarian, omnivorous, whatever. The Mediterranean diet is omnivorous, but prudent omnivorous diet microbiota profile doesn't differ significantly from a prudent vegetarian or vegan microbiota profile. Just really got to get your fiber. I mean, that's really that's it.
Yeah, thank God. See, I talked to this Dr. Joel Kahn. He's actually one of the leading cardiac longevity doctors, and he's all about vegetarian, vegan. I just can't be me. I'm happy to hear this, so I could I could be fine with that. But yeah, that's super interesting. So not even like let's say you go buy probiotics, right, from your local store. Is that overrated too?
Not necessarily. There are applications for probiotic supplementation, but it looks like they're fairly limited. They're also strain specific. So a strain of a species is a very, very specific, like when we're looking at how things are related, they're very closely related, two strains are, but they're different enough that it really, really, really matters. Because you can have some strains within a species that are pathogenic, that cause disease, and other strains that are neutral or even beneficial. So probiotic effects, do probiotics work? Well, it depends on which probiotic you're taking for what. If you take, a probiotic to improve your athletic performance, no, it's not going to work, but it doesn't mean all probiotics don't work. Just means that we haven't identified a probiotic that improves athletic performance yet. And the same thing goes for weight management, for mood disorders, that we haven't been able to form a consensus yet because the studies that we have so far show such mixed effects. In some cases, people see no improvement. In some cases, people do see an improvement. And then the way that we pool the data might also make things a little bit unclear because, we can't look at we might look at just bifidobacteria. Well, there are many different species and strains that we might, be able to study. So it would be kind of like saying, do sports supplements work? Well, which one and for what?
Yeah.
So they do have applications, but it's primarily looking at, it's primarily within the realm of like GI distress. So some do appear to improve some of the symptoms of IBS or IBD, traveler's diarrhea or antibiotic associated diarrhea. Very weak evidence that they might modestly reduce the length of like an upper respiratory tract infection. But, for the most part, I'd say the strongest evidence exists right now for S. boulardii, which is a yeast, and BSL-3 and a few species of bifidobacteria. But there, again, it's going to be modest, and it's not something that should be used like in place of actual medication for your illness.
I see. So is this, are you talking about like probiotic supplements or like kefir, or is it all, are you talking about all of them?
Okay, so that's a really good question. And actually, there have been a couple really great reviews that have come out. I know Kevin Whalen just was a co-author on one, and they looked at the effects of fermented foods. So fermented foods are not necessarily considered probiotic foods. And in fact, the only food that really should be labeled as a probiotic food based on the documented benefits would be fermented dairy. So kefir would would fall in line with that. So fermented dairy, some things like kefir or yogurt, that has been shown to exert a number of different modest health effects, and it's associated with reduced cardiovascular disease, reduced all-cause mortality, and improved lipid levels, improved insulin handling in type 2 diabetics. So I would say if people are interested in adding a fermented food that would be worthwhile, it would be dairy. And the reason that we can call that a probiotic food is that it contains strains of probiotics that have been shown to confer a benefit to the host, and that beverage that fermented dairy does actually confer a benefit to the host. But things like kombucha, there's actually no human trials looking at kombucha, so there's no empirical evidence to support any claims about kombucha at this point. Kombucha, sauerkraut, natto, tempeh, sourdough bread, these all have weak supporting evidence at best. In some cases, it's one study or maybe two studies, and one shows an effect and the other one shows no effect. So the rest of the fermented foods may contain, that this is the other point of confusion, I think. Just because a food contains beneficial compounds doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to have an effect on you. So even though we can say, oh yes, they have more folate and, maybe higher phytochemical content or something like that, that doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to have any effect in the human body, because even an increase from a minuscule amount to a slightly larger minuscule amount won't necessarily be an effective dose. So that might be, part of it. And then the other thing is just that, if the studies haven't been done, we can say all we want about kombucha, and it's got all these potential health effects, and it's had, effects in rodents and cell culture and whatnot. It could certainly have awesome effects in humans, but we have to wait until that becomes apparent before we say it.
Yeah, there you go. And I apologize. Kefir? It's kefir? Man, I butchered that.
I don't know. Is it kefir?
I have no idea. I've heard it so many different ways. But all I know is that, look, I've gotten it from the store, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then I mix in some chia seeds, maybe honey, almond butter, and it tastes pretty good. But some of my friends and I, we tried to make it, and it's so nasty. Just watching it sit there on the counter, and then it's all clumpy with water and the curd. It's just, I don't even know. You get the grains and you put it in the bottle. It's so nasty. It's so nasty. I don't even.
Oh yeah. And
express.
there are risks too to at home fermentation. Because if you do it wrong, then you will breed a bunch of nasty pathogens. You want to talk about some foodborne illness, there's your gut detox. You just give yourself severe food poisoning and don't do that. So it has to be, we have to be, cognizant of that probiotics and probiotic foods and fermented foods are not necessarily without risk just because they're natural. Listeria is natural also, but it will make you vomit uncontrollably and poop your brains out. So let's not assume that oh, this is a bacteria that grows in food, it must be good for me.
Yeah. So yeah, that's interesting, but then again, even when we look at gut health, the first thing that comes to people's minds and people as in people like me that don't know anything, is probiotic, right? Mm-hmm. But then I hear things like prebiotic. I hear this kind of stuff, and I'm I don't even know, what is that?
Yeah. So prebiotics are, they are energy sources for the bacteria. So in most cases, when we talk about a prebiotic, we're talking about a dietary fiber or resistant starch that's not digestible by humans. And so it goes to the large intestine where it can be used by the bacteria there. So they will ferment it. They make ATP, they make their own energy, and then we get either gas, which is not so great, or we get those short chain fatty acids. So we don't have to supplement with prebiotics because we can just get them from our diet. And then we've got synbiotics, which are, it's a combination of a prebiotic and a probiotic. And so it would be a probiotic with some fiber added to it. And then there are postbiotics, which are beneficial compounds made by bacteria in our gut. And it doesn't necessarily have to be from bacteria that we ingest, like probiotics. It's just the resident microbes there.
Okay, that's interesting. So it's
Mhm.
pre, post, anti. What am I
Yeah,
missing?
I know there's so
Pro.
many. Yeah. And I want to say that so I was listening to a podcast and I can't remember his name now, but he actually had coined the term prebiotic with a colleague of his, and they weren't sure what they wanted to call it. And I want to say he had like he'd come up with another term. It was like, oh man, I wish I could remember. It was like peribiotic or something, but it was like something different, you know. And they had like kind of gone back and forth about like what term to use. And he said like his colleague was more senior, and so he came up with prebiotics, and that's what they named it. And he laughed about how um about the quality of his own publication. He didn't think that it was like that great. You know, he said they kind of wrote it in a rushed way, and didn't think that it was going to be anything worthwhile, because it's just like, oh yeah, this is a fancy way of saying like dietary fiber, and it blew up. I mean, it's huge. It's one of the most cited articles in that journal. So yeah, people are like you said, it's been in the last few years. I mean, in 2014, I finished my doctorate, and it was on the gut microbiome, and no one knew what I was talking about. It was not a cool thing. I would say I really started to see it take off maybe in like 2016, 2017. And that's when I resigned. So I was teaching for 4 years. And then after I worked with RP for a year, I was kind of toying with the idea, and Dr. Mike Israetel was like, well, you know, you could talk about this gut health stuff because it seems to be like a pretty hot, trendy topic at the moment. And I was like, oh, I guess so. I mean, didn't really intend to do anything with it. And then since then, I mean, the past few years, like, oh, now everyone's like, you know, gut health expert and selling like gut resets. And there's like, you know, all these new supplements and whatnot coming out. And one of my clients says there's all these gut health journalists, which I think is a really funny term.
Do you think fasting has an effect on gut health? Any kind of fasting, intermittent, time restricted eating, whatever they call it.
Yeah, so you know what? I've been delving into that. So I'm writing a book. I'm almost done with it, thank goodness. For RP, on gut
Oh,
microbiome
nice.
science. Yeah, so I'm writing it with my colleague Jessie Hoffman. So she has her PhD in RD, and she also studied the gut microbiome. She finished just few years after I did. Um, and we've been looking into fasting because we've got a whole section on like dietary patterns. And I thought, we probably should put in like fasting or time restricted feeding. We don't have a lot of human clinical data on the effects of fasting on the gut microbiota. A couple small pilot studies have shown some changes in some of the inflammatory cells that we see in the gut. There's been one that's, I believe, looked into like multiple sclerosis, and you know the link there, and saw some alleviation of symptoms. Looking at things like long-term starvation, like in individuals with anorexia nervosa, there is not a consistent pattern for how the microbiota responds to that. Some see increased diversity, some see reduced diversity. We also can look at like animal models of like hibernation
Yeah.
or starvation and things like that. What we tend to see are that microbes that are okay with nutrient deprivation, that have like maybe like longer life cycles, or can, you know, maybe scavenge from the protective mucus layer of the gut, or maybe can use like other, you know, amino acids, you know, like bodily tissues, that they tend to hang around. But we do see, you know, a loss of diversity in terms of the ones that need energy, you know, that need dietary microbe accessible carbohydrates. And then there's also a diurnal circadian rhythm to microbial growth. So if we do something like time restricted feeding, that could potentially have an effect. Like there is a physiological mechanism for that. And we do see that in rodents, at least, like complete removal of the microbiota seems to disrupt their circadian rhythms and, you know, their ability to gain weight and, you know, their normal like eating patterns. So there's a relationship there, but we're not sure yet like what effect TRF or intermittent fasting might have on the microbiome in humans. So,
Do you recommend intermittent fasting to your clients, or like especially like your athletes?
I don't recommend anything, honestly. My recommendation is that they find a dietary pattern that they can adhere to that is supportive of longevity and well-being. for most people, that's not going to be a diet on either end of the extreme. You know, like it's not like the carnivore diet is not going to be sustainable for a lot of people. It's not, and it is also just completely antithetical to everything that we know or are reasonably confident about in the realm of gut health. Um, but if a person wants to, do a vegan diet and they want to do a ketogenic diet, or they want to count macros, or they don't want to count macros, that person is the expert on themselves. So my recommendation is, find the foods that digest well for you, that help you feel satiated in terms of like physical fullness, and also satisfied in terms of, okay, I'm done with that meal. That was great. I'm done eating. I'm not going to go and feel like, oh, it didn't hit the spot. And like, what else? Or, I'm so restricted. I'm going to eat all of this right now because I don't think I'm going to let myself have it ever again. So that is going to be, again, person specific. So yeah, I'm like very on the opposite end of like, I'm not going to tell a person like, you need to do whatever. The most that I'll do is like, if a person comes to me and says, they have severe GI distress and they think it's a FODMAP issue based on, having ruled everything else out, then I'll say like, oh, hey, yeah, let's look at your diet and see where your FODMAPs are, and then go through that process.
So is that the way that you can, like, when you do recommend to your clients certain things for their gut health or whatever,
Mm-hmm.
do you think there's a way to reverse like a terrible lifestyle for like a 40-year-old man, right? A 40-year-old man has been eating like crap for his whole life, and he has terrible gut, right? Is that reversible?
Is his lifestyle reversible?
No, his gut health,
Well, we don't even have really a clear picture of what is like good or bad gut health. Do the microbiota respond to changes in nutrient availability? Yes. So if we go from a diet that is highly processed, ultra refined, deficient in fiber, and never eating any vegetables, and then we start eating vegetables and providing some microbe accessible carbs, whole grains, and things like that, we will very likely see an increase in diversity, both in terms of taxonomy, who's there, and also the functional diversity, so the genetic diversity of the microbiota. And we've been able to see the opposite, and we actually have been able to see changes in diversity in people who, take a fiber supplement, for example, or engage in physical activity. And on the other hand, if we give people, this was a landmark study done, probably in 2013 or so. If we give people a diet that's just meat and cheese, we will see reductions in microbial diversity. So I hesitate to use the term like good gut health or bad gut health, because they're just as nebulous and like abused as the term gut health in general. But can we, increase the diversity of the microbiome? Very likely, yes. But I would say more important than that, because we don't even know that matters that much. So we don't know what the clinical outcomes are. But in changing the dietary pattern, we're supportive of the person's quality and quantity of life, like reducing cardiovascular disease risk and all of that. So not to discount that, like, yeah, the microbiome is important. But if a person came to me and had, that type of dietary pattern and really wanted to make a change, my focus wouldn't be like, well, let's see how we can fix your gut. It would be, awesome. What do you feel is your reasonable next step? What do you want to change? And then help them come up with really realistic, achievable goals that we break down stepwise. And if that is like, because I have had people even on Instagram that I'm not coaching, but they're like, hey, I started to eat vegetables after I read some of your posts and whatnot. And like, I feel so much better. Like I poop better now. And I'm like, that's awesome. So even if it's that, just like adding vegetables to each of your meals, that's fantastic. So to me, the reason that I talk about the gut microbiome and deliver evidence-based information is just so that I can keep it realistic and I can keep it accessible to people, and prevent them from being like taken advantage of or wasting a lot of time and money and effort on really like fruitless endeavors, when it's really, as it can be just as simple as like, can we increase your whole grain intake or your vegetable intake? Or if you're having GI distress and it's not anything else and it's a FODMAP issue, awesome. You know what? There's a systematic evidence-based way of going through that. You don't have to do one of these stupid invalid food sensitivity tests. There's actual chemistry behind why FODMAPs make you feel this way. And like, that's something that we can really do.
And we really appreciate that. Keeping it real always. That's we really admire that. And we know that you're short on time, so I got one last question.
Yeah.
What is a day in the life of Dr. Gabrielle Fundaro?
Oh, wow. I never talk about personal stuff, but I guess I will today. So day in the life, I wake up very early in the morning. I wake up about 4:45. Not of my
Jeez.
not of my own volition. If
That's
I
late at night, not early in the morning. That's I wake
I
up
know,
late at night.
I know, yeah. I take a short nap and then I wake up again the
Yeah.
same day. Yeah, so I wake up with my partner because I think it's important to, have that time together. And I know he appreciates it, but I'm like, I don't really see, an alternative to that. Like I wouldn't want to just sleep in. So I wake up at 4:45 and we spend time together, hang out with the dogs and whatnot. He goes off to work, and then I start my day usually around like 6:30, 6:45 after I've like eaten breakfast. And if people are curious, I'm an ovo pescatarian, so I just don't want to eat like pork and beef and chicken because I really like cows and pigs, and I just like hate preparing chicken. So I can deal with like I eat salmon a few times a week. For the most part though, it's really just like eggs to a limited extent, and egg whites. And really it's born out of like what's just easy for me. So then I do Mondays, Wednesdays, Fridays, I do mostly emails. So I'll email for like 4 hours or so. I've got telehealth clients that might be anywhere from like 30 minutes up to like 5 hours of telehealth. I do usually a couple podcasts a week. I try to wrap up my day around 3:30. We train at like 4:30. We've got an in-home gym, which is really nice. And
Nice.
then, yeah, then it's kind of like hang out, have dinner, hang out with the dogs, and sometimes like, I don't know, watch some comedy or something, and then go to bed at like 8:30 or 9 because then I wake up again later
Yeah,
that evening.
exactly.
So yeah, so that's my day right now. It's a lot of just like sitting or on my treadmill. We actually just put together the shelves for my walking treadmill desk.
Oh,
Because
nice,
yeah,
nice.
yeah. So I'm trying to like finish this book, and I'm trying to like plan for all the comprehensive coaching stuff next year. So I am on my computer a lot. But usually by December things slow down a little bit and I can like take it a little bit easier.
Well, there you guys have it. It's a day in the life. We really appreciate you joining us on this podcast, Dr. Fundaro. Stick with me for like a minute or two after we officially end the podcast just to go over some things. And yeah, on behalf of all my subscribers, viewers, like we really appreciate it. Thank
I
you.
appreciate you having me on. It's always an honor.